Hello, welcome to my video, and here I'm going to show you the game from the semifinals of Grand Prix in Berlin between Levon Aronian and Leinier Dominguez. This was the game 1 of their match, and let's see what happened in this game. In this game we had the Queen's Gambit accepted, takes, and Levon played e4. And recently we had a couple of games which continued like this with b5. I think Duda Karyakin from Tata Steel, even here, Wesley So played against Dominguez, I think, in the group stage. And now Levon played principally with a4, trying to break the queenside structure, c6 by Dominguez, and now a, b, c, b, and knight c3. After which there is a line which is quite interesting to play a6. After capturing, white gets the exchange, but things are not so easy. After bishop b7, the rook goes back, and after e6, things are very sharp. White cannot develop so freely because these pawns on the queen side are very advanced, and the bishop can just move to e2 and put his knight to f3. Also, defending the pawn on e4 now seems a bit slow, because after this, black also has an option of playing f5, opening up the position, and after capturing to go knight c6. And the position becomes more and more unclear, so let's not get too deep into this. Maybe some other time we'll talk about this position, but in the game, what happened was that Dominguez played queen b6, defending this pawn, very logical response, and now Levon went for knight d5, very concrete line. After which Dominguez went for queen b7, and now bishop f4, heading for knight c7 next, which is quite unpleasant to deal with. And actually there's no way to stop this. If you go knight a6, you can just capture on a6, and still you have knight c7 on the next move. So after bishop f4, black played e5, and after bishop e5, knight d7. Now immediately knight c7 is not so good, because after king d8, if you capture on a8, I think that now bishop b4 is quite strong. Yeah, bishop b4 is crushing now, and after king e2 there's checkmate on e4, so that would be a quite quick end for white. But of course Levon doesn't go for this, he just goes bishop f4 first. Black still cannot avoid knight c7, because what else to do? You cannot go rook b8, you cannot king to d8, doesn't really do much, so black just wants to develop first. Now he allows this, but after king d8 he takes the exchange, but after this knight e2, queen a8 back. Now we have some material disbalance. White has the exchange, but he lost the pawn, and also there is a nice outpost for the knight, potentially on d5, which seems to be quite a good compensation for black. White's king is not out of danger. Black needs two moves, bishop b4 and rook e8, to somehow put pressure on white's king. So still white has problems to solve, and his main issue is his king's safety. And he goes for the move f3. He tries somehow to evacuate his king, let's say, to f2, and to try to make artificial castle in the next couple of moves. King f2, knight g3, bishop e2, rook e1, and then to put his king to safety. And now black uses time to go knight d5 to put pressure on the knight. And now Levon gives a check, f6, and he went back to d2. He sensed that it's useful to provoke f6 to weaken the light squares around the king. Now black finishes developing by bishop d6, and now knight g3. He's ready to go king f2 next, to do the before mentioned plan with king f2 and artificial castling. Now queen b8, and now king f2, with the dual purpose to save the knight on g3 and also to do the mentioned plan. Black had a chance to implement some really nasty plan, and the plan was the following: to go bishop c7 now, with the idea to go bishop b6 and put pressure on the d4 pawn. And in case of bishop e2, to just go bishop b6. And white has a big problem, how to defend the d4 pawn. He can do bishop a5 to exchange off bishops, but after capturing and queen b6, when the rook goes back, let's say to a1, there's always knight e5 and knight d3 next. And eventually black will capture the d4 pawn. After, let's say, queen d2, there's knight d3, and after this you take on d4, and after this cd, and black's position seems quite okay. Nothing of this is forced, so white could have played something else, but I'm just showing the main idea of the move bishop c7, and that's just to go to b6 and to put pressure on the d4 pawn. But Leinier plays in this position rook e8, which also seems very logical, and after bishop e2 he went for bishop c7, heading for b6, and after rook e1 for Levon, trying to do the mentioned plan with king g1 and getting the king to safety, now Leinier plays bishop b6. But in this moment black is not ready to capture on d4 because there are some loose pieces on the long diagonal. Now Levon plays king g1, and I think here he should have played a6 to make his queenside pawns a bit more stable, because there's always some threat of going b3 next to use the b5 pawn, to use this loose b5 pawn. And here Dominguez played knight e5. For example, also if you take on d4, I think that doesn't do much for black, because after king h1, yes, black took a pawn, but now his king is in more danger because there's no protection on the d file, and bishop a5 might come next. The knight on d5 is loose, so I think that this is quite risky to play, to capture this pawn, because bishop a5 is a very strong threat. And yeah, maybe even knight f5 next. Knight e4 also looks quite dangerous for black, and I think black should keep this pawn on d4 as his protection, not white's. But he went for knight e5, and now after king h1, now it's even worse to capture on d4, because there's bishop a5 check and losing at least either a bishop on d4 or the knight on d5. So he goes back to c6, tries to hit on this d4 pawn, but now there is a problem, and that's why a6 move was so important. White plays b3. Now he is undermining these pawns on the queen side. What to do now? If you take on b3, there's at least queen b3, if not even bishop b5. But I think queen b3 is decisive here. And after that, b5 pawn is going to drop, so I don't really like this for black. So Dominguez chose here to play c3, but now there's a small tactic, because after bishop b5, the knight on c6 is hanging, so capturing on d2 doesn't really do much because of this and bishop c6, losing even the knight on d5 next. So black has to do some defending by bishop d7, after which white exchanges one pair of rooks, bishop e8, and now bishop e1, which was a small inaccuracy, I would say. I think here bishop c6 was much better, and after this bishop e1. If black tries to attack the d4 pawn by queen d4, there is a move queen d3, followed by knight e2 and taking on c3. For example, if you take on d4 like this, there is knight e2, and after queen e3, just capture, and after this, take on c3. And if queen takes d4, then I think you can just go here, take, and go rook d1. And if you go for something like bishop e5, I think there is knight e2. With the threat of this pin, I think there is no way to save this pawn. Maybe c2, but I think after this, the c2 pawn is doomed, because after knight e3, there is bishop to d2, chasing this knight away and then grabbing the pawn on c2. So here bishop c6 was actually the better choice, much better choice than what was played in the game. Levon played bishop e1, and now he gave some chance to Dominguez. Now black took on d4 and we had bishop e8, and now if king takes, things are much easier because there's bishop c3. Because of this check on e1, black will have tough time to defend this. So after bishop e8, he chose to input c2, which was very clever, and now queen d3 to keep defending the pawn. Now king e8 by black, and here Levon makes the second mistake, and this time this mistake makes Black's life much easier. And he goes for bishop d2. Instead, he could have played knight e2. The reason why, well, the reason why is very simple. You want to destabilize this c2 pawn. What can black do? If he takes, then he's just losing the c pawn, because after this there's bishop d2 or bishop f2. Once the knight drops on e3, there is also attack on the c2 pawn, so I don't see a way for black to continue this. Yeah, after queen e5, let's say, there is capture, capture, and rook c1. And now if bishop b2, which is very tricky, there's bishop g3, fortunately for white. And then he'll grab the pawn on c2. So let's go back to the game. Levon played bishop d2. And now black plays queen e5. Rook e1 is impossible now because of queen takes and deflecting the bishop, queening on the next move. So Levon played rook c1. And now it's time to push the pawn. Dominguez played this to try to somehow limit the knight on g3. Queen c4, and now knight e3. I think this was the final mistake of black. I think f4 was promising much more fight. And after knight e4, there is knight e3. And what can white do? If he takes this pawn on e3, becomes really dangerous along with this c2 pawn. And actually this material advantage of an exchange up doesn't feel like that. And also bishop c7 might be very dangerous in the next couple of moves, so I don't see it as a huge threat for black. On the contrary, it seems like white is doing poorly. If he gives a check, then black can go here, and after one more check, he can even afford to exchange queens here. Let's say if he takes, now the b3 pawn becomes vulnerable. Let's say if he plays g3, there is this move, and after bishop e3, which seems good for white on the first glance, there is fe, and actually this e pawn cannot be stopped. After knight d4, rook c1 and e2. Black is going to play knight c2 next and support his e pawn, so that's kind of a bummer for white. Let's say this, there is bishop a5. So yeah, f4 was a better choice. There were a lot more options for white after f4, but I'm not going to cover them all. You can do it on your own, maybe. Dominguez played knight e3 here, which allowed queen c8, and after queen f7, queen d7 check. I think that even easier was to go for f4, which is a very clever move. To somehow achieve rook e1 without black having f4 himself. For example, if you go queen f4, there is rook e1, and since the queen is defending the c pawn from promoting, also there's no issue on the back rank, so everything is pretty cool for white. And after queen e7, there is also rook e1. Black's knight on e3 is quite awkward, and that's why f4 is so effective immediately, because if you try to exchange queens to somehow survive, then after queen e6, knight e6, you can take on e3, take, and take on c2 in the end. And after bishop f4, there is knight f5, and I think this endgame is just dead lost for black, because he's an exchange down, and there's no visible problems for white to convert. Once he trades one pair of minor pieces, it's going to be really easy to convert. Once he gets his king closer to the center, closer to his pieces, it's going to be a piece of cake to realize. But Levon plays something differently. It doesn't change the outcome so much. Queen d7 check first, and after king g6, now he plays f4. And again, black is forced to exchange queens, because if he takes, there's this rook e1 classic response. Okay, so after f4, queen e6 was played by Dominguez, and now Levon took on e6, knight e6, and now knight e2. First defending the pawn before grabbing the c2 pawn. Knight g4 by black, trying some tricks with discovered checks like knight f2, knight somewhere, but Levon is just too cautious. He plays g3. He is making some space for his king to g2. Knight c5 by Dominguez, and now b4. He's not giving Dominguez any of his pawns, so he does that. Knight d3, and now he takes on c2. We had one more check, but after king g2, knight e4, knight c1, black is forced to exchange one pair of pieces, one pair of minor pieces, and in this position Dominguez resigned because there's nothing he can do. After, let's say, knight c1, bishop c1, white is going to play king f3, bishop e3, and start putting pressure on the a7 pawn, which will finally be doomed. Also, if he takes on d2, there's this capture on d3, and knight e5 comes. It's very dangerous for black to play, and rook c6. Black's king is in so much trouble. White's king will just improve his position, and eventually this queenside pawn on a7 is going to drop by some rook c6, knight e7, and slowly pushing this bishop away from defending the pawn on a7. So that's it. After game 1, Aronian is leading 1-0, and in the next game Dominguez will try to survive by winning with white, and we'll see what happens. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section, and have a great day. See you soon, and bye.